Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dan Gifford, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors here at the Filson Historical Society. Happy for you to join us both in person and virtually, for those of you that are here virtually. This is the third lecture in our annual Filson Friday series. And again, thank you for coming to our program today, Digitizing Your Family Treasures. I am so pleased to be able to introduce Danielle. I've known Danielle for many years and had the opportunity to work together. Danielle Spalenka has been at the Filson since 2019. She oversees the day-to-day digitization projects, manages workflows, and oversees grant-funded digitization. I'm going to have to say that easier. Digitization projects. She provides vision and leadership to the Filson's overall digital collections and preservation strategy. Prior to joining the Filson staff in April of 19, Ms. Spalenka held the role of preservation specialist at the Northeast Document Conservation Center and served as a project director for the Digital POWRR Project and curator of manuscripts at Northern Illinois University Regional History Center. She holds a BA in history from St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, and an MA in library and information sciences from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. When the presentation is over, I will return to answer questions as time permits. For those of us here in the room, please come up to the microphones. We have one on each side at the front of the room, or if you're joining us digitally, please drop them into the chat and we'll get to as many questions as we have time for here at the end. So with that, please join me in welcoming Danielle Spalenka. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that nice introduction and welcome. This is such a packed audience, and I'm here. We have quite a few people online as well. So I'm really pleased that you're able to join us here today. And you're probably here, whether in person or virtually, because you're interested in digitizing your family materials. And why not? Most family memories nowadays are created in digital format, whether it's on your phone or sharing a text chain family in an email. And our physical family materials aren't as easily shared. So it might be tempting to start a digitization project so you can share them more widely. But starting a digitization project with your family treasures involves more than just picking the right equipment. And I'll go over the steps today to get you started on your own digitization project. For today, I'm going to be mostly talking about paper-based materials, so letters, diaries, and photographs. Photographs are the ones that really come to mind for folks when they want to share and digitize their family materials. There are other sorts of family materials available out there, like VHS tapes, home movies, even oral histories, audio, but I will touch on some of those, but primarily paper-based and photographic materials is what we're going to be going over. And I'll go over why you may want to start a digitization project before moving into the steps and some of the technical considerations before we have plenty of time for a Q&A session. So why would you want to digitize? I'm sure you probably are here because of that. And I actually get asked this question all the time. And it's the reason I wanted to do and cover this topic today, because I get asked this question all the time of how can I start a digitization project for my family materials? And most of the time people jump straight to, well, what equipment do I need? Or how do I name my files? And these are important questions, which we will be covering, but I always like to step back and ask people what the purpose of their project is. So we'll go over why some of those things are important. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, digitized photographs have a lot of advantages over, physical material. You can organize them a lot better. You can back them up, create multiple copies, and share them much easier than if they're, say, sitting in a box in your basement somewhere. This isn't very accessible. Trying to tackle and organize a collection in a box in a state like this isn't as friendly, it can be intimidating. But if you have them digitized, it's much easier to make them more accessible, to easily organize, to label them. So there's a lot of advantages for that. Another advantage of digitizing is that you can actually restore and enhance photographs that might have been damaged or faded over the years. Color photographs in particular are prone to fading over time. So we have an example right here. It was kept in a frame for a very long time, and you can see the coloring has faded. If you digitize it and have a little bit of tech savviness, you can restore it to its original colors, and so it's not as damaged from the light exposure. Another advantage is that you might have some interesting formats sitting out there, like maybe a vacation from a while ago is sitting in a box with color slides. You might not have the right equipment for that. So in case you have, unless you have a slide carousel and a large projector, you're not going to be able to really share those color slides or those 8mm films that are sitting in a box somewhere. So digitizing them allows them to become accessible. However, this is my main sticking point, and something I'm going to really harp on today is that a lot of people do ask me about digitizing because they want to preserve them. And I need to clarify one thing. Digitizing does not necessarily mean preservation. I'm going to say that again. This is my main advocacy thing, what I do for my job. Digitizing does not necessarily mean preservation. Well, why is that? Just because you're scanning all your family documents or photos doesn't mean you're preserving them. They can be a preservation tactic if they're heavily damaged or they're in a susceptible or fragile file format like VHS tape, which I'll cover later on. But what I want to emphasize is that when you are scanning a letter or photograph, you are actually creating something, a digital object, a file that now needs to be cared for and managed and made accessible in a way that can be, so you have something that you now need to maintain and manage. Not everything on the internet lasts forever. So just putting it online doesn't necessarily mean it's going to last forever. And when you create a file format, when you create a file from a digitized object, you then have to find it, describe it in a way that's usable, and manage it. You know, Google is really wonderful. You can just type in whatever, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on the back end to help you find that material. So it's just very important that if you're thinking about preserving those materials, think about why you want to preserve them, because for your physical material, I always advocate that as long as they're in a safe and stable storage environment, so in a box, out of sunlight, paper-based material actually lasts a lot longer than our digital materials. Digital materials are much more fragile, and I'll go over an example here right now. So I like to give this example of how digital materials are a little bit more fragile and susceptible to loss, and how not everything on the internet lasts forever. So here I have a screenshot of the very first White House website. Whitehouse.gov launched in 1993. The first screenshot or any sort of usable format for this, however, was not preserved or archived until 1996. That's when the Internet Archive came around, and they said, we need to start preserving this stuff before it's lost. So this is what we have. You can use this website a little bit. You can search in that search bar, healthcare, learn about some different topics, but it didn't grab the whole website. And I know it's a little bit hard to see, especially if you're in person, but if you're virtually, you can see that there's some thumbnails like the White House icon. Those were actual images, but they're not there anymore. So we don't get a complete sense of what this whitehouse.gov website is. And for future researchers, this could be a huge thing to know. But anything before 1996 of what was on this website is just gone. So not everything on the internet lasts forever. Digital technology is pretty fragile compared to our paper-based materials, which is all comes back to why I emphasize that if you want to do a digitization project, it's great for access for sharing them with all your family members worldwide, across the country, organizing them better, but it's not necessarily a preservation strategy. So I will get off my soapbox now about that. All right, so once you think about why you want to digitize your materials, I really want to go through the steps in the digitization process. So what do those steps actually look like? And I'm here to tell you that it's a lot less technical considerations like the equipment involved, file naming formats. Those are important too. But a lot of it is actually developing a good plan. Having a good plan and keeping good documentation of your decisions will go a long way in helping you enjoy and share your digitized family materials. If you just jump in without a plan, you risk creating a bunch of files that are disorganized and hard to find. And if your physical materials like family photos are not labeled, or if they're disorganized or just shoved into a box like what we saw in the screenshot a few slides ago, it won't really solve that problem. You might just now be creating a digital mess. And I want to prevent you from creating a digital mess if they're in a state of disarray currently. So coming up with a good plan will help them make them accessible and actually usable for you. Again, it's really tempting to just jump in and press that scan button, but there are lots of things to consider before we hit scanning. So let's walk through that process, and I'll talk about each of these steps in the process through each of these slides. The first one is selection, and that is so important. And that's why it's the first step. You don't want to digitize everything. You don't need to digitize everything. In fact, I will even advocate and give you permission to throw away some things. I know that's very scandalous, but it's okay. If you have 10 shots of a sunset from a vacation 50 years ago, you don't need 10 shots of that sunset. You can keep one and throw the rest away. I promise it's okay. So you don't want to keep all 10 of those, and that you don't have to scan all 10 of those either. So that's why we select. It would take a lot of time to scan everything. And also it would cost some money in storage. I know storage seems really cheap. I'll go over that in the storage section, but more and more places are starting, especially if you do a cloud hosting service, a lot of them are starting to pick up on, oh, you're running out of storage because we're going to decrease it from 15 gigabytes to 1 gigabyte, and now you have to pay for it. So that's something to consider too. So selecting a sample and having a project in mind is going to be way less overwhelming and give you a really good first step. After we talk about selection criteria and considerations, I'll move into equipment and some storage information before we actually go into some of the technical information that you might come across when you are ready to hit the scan button, and then how to organize and make them accessible afterwards. All right, so first, selecting items. It can seem really overwhelming to see a large amount of photos or letters and figure out where to start. But taking the time to select items and making it a small iterative process is going to help make things more manageable. So a couple of different ways you can think about that. You can start with just a format, whether it's letters or a group of photographs. Because photographs are so popular and easily shared and pretty easy to digitize, those are really a popular format for people to start. But again, if you have a large number of them, it might seem overwhelming of where to figure out where to start. So you can sort by format. And if you're doing photographs, you can sort them by date, events, or people. So those are interesting ways to start. And if you just want to start small with like a small pilot project, you can pick one event like Cousin Susie's wedding 20 years ago. Those are probably all grouped together. You can get out some duplicates and just start with that project and go from there. You don't have to do them all at once. For letters, if you do choose to do a letter digitization project, usually organizing them by date or chronologically, and then with who they are corresponding with. And then again, sorting by format is going to be really important too. So digitizing photographs versus color slides and letters is going to sometimes take different equipment, which is maybe why you want to think about them separately. It's tempting to digitize albums and bound material. Maybe you have photographs in a photo album, and if you can take them out easily without damaging them and can keep track of any identification information, that's something to consider. But bound material like scrapbooks is sometimes a little bit harder because you need more specialized equipment. Scrapbooks are very fragile and have a lot of things going on in them, and they're not a favorite of archivists for preservation issues. But that's also something to consider. So ask yourself, can this item be scanned? If something is damaged, photographs, especially if they were kept, together with a rubber band, can curl over time. You don't want to damage it further by putting it on a flatbed scanner because it might damage and ruin the emulsification on photograph itself. So something to consider are the condition of the materials, as well as, the events and the format. I know it's a lot to consider, but it's just some questions that you want to ask yourself before just jumping in. And it'll make it much more once you select and actually organize materials, you're well on your way to have already started a project. So once you've selected and decided what you want to scan and have laid out the scope of your project, it's time to talk equipment, which is really fun to consider. Again, the different formats you have will have different considerations for equipment. As I mentioned, the easiest formats to scan are documents like letters and then photographs. I mentioned that bound material is a little bit trickier, but negatives, home movie footage, and even color slides are a little bit trickier and just require different equipment. So it's just something to consider. Now, you also need to consider what type of equipment you have on hand. Having a home computer is obviously necessary, but there's lots of different options. Like if you were to just go on Amazon or Google and say photo scanning material, you're going to get a lot of different things at a lot of different price ranges. Oops, excuse me. I'm here to say that a lot of the nicer standard equipment that's been used in libraries and archives has become way more affordable. So there's lots of affordable options out there, but I want to just go over some of the different types of things you might come across. So on the far left here, we have a document and photograph scanner. These will come up really automatically. They're probably the most affordable on the market. These are the auto feed scanners, and you just put in a bunch of papers and it goes real quick. They're mostly meant for like offices for like routine records management, but a lot of people like to use them for family collections. I don't personally like to use these, and there's a little bit of caution with them because if they can get jammed up, if you have very fragile and sentimental photographs or letters that are going into those document feeds, if there's a rip, it could damage it even further. So yes, it's very fast. It'll get the job done very quickly, but there's a higher risk of damaging your family materials. So you want to ask yourself, is this worth putting into this document feeder? So they're also cheaper. There's also, there's benefits and stuff like that too. However, even though I just talk about the risks of an auto scanner feed, the middle slide is a color slide auto scanner feed. And those are actually really wonderful for color slides. Color slides are a really stable format because they have a protective barrier around it. And these are meant to just go through them quickly. So I highly recommend if you have a bunch of color slides that you want to digitize from a family vacation or whatever, it's a really great option, and they're pretty affordable too. Some of them can also do like negatives and even some film, but you just have to be careful, again, the condition of those items. And finally, and my personal recommendation, if your budget allows, is to go with a flatbed scanner. It won't damage your documents. They have become much faster, and their software is pretty user-friendly. Plus, you can really find some high-quality ones that'll give you, preservation quality file formats for around like the $200 to $300 range. Most flatbed scanners can handle up to like legal size documents. So if you have something larger, they do make them bigger, but those are more expensive. So you don't have to go with a giant one that will, digitize a large map if you don't have those. So and they take up a lot of room. So lots of considerations. I do want to touch on some film-based formats too. Like if you wanted to photograph, digitize some negatives or home movie footage on 8mm film or VHS tape, you do have some options like that at home. I was just kind of looking through Amazon and saw that there's this really interesting one that would like take the negative and put it onto your phone. So that seems really fun. There's a lot of them that you can do at home for digitizing 8mm or Super 8 film. But again, there's a caveat. Film in particular is very fragile and runs a huge risk of permanent loss if the equipment damages it. If the reel of 8mm film breaks while on one of these machines, do you have the know-how to fix it? Do you have the right equipment? There is some way to do it if you have a splicer and some tape, but it's very intimidating even for me to do that. And if your precious home movies are on a VHS tape and you haven't touched that VHS player in a really long time, like this one says, I eat tapes for lunch, you risk permanent loss if it goes to that. So there's always those downsides. There are ways to convert VHS tape to DVD, but unless you have the right equipment that's been managed well and you trust it not to eat it for lunch, you may want to look and consider professional vendors who can take on those challenging formats. All right, so once you've selected your items and figured out the right equipment for it, let's talk a little bit about storage. Deciding on where you want to store things before hitting the scan button is always a good idea. Scanners will just default to whatever local hard drive that you go on, but keeping it on one device is not my recommendation. A mix of storage options is always a good idea in case something happens to the file or even your computer. In general, it's good to keep at least 2 copies and save them in a mix of places, like cloud storage, your computer, or even an external hard drive or jump drive. Just remember that some of these devices become obsolete over time. I'm looking at you, Mr. Floppy Disk up here, where some of my undergrad papers are just in limbo on some floppy disk drives. So keeping them in a variety of formats and in multiple locations gives them a better chance of being safe. And I'll let you know too, because technology changes so rapidly, especially nowadays, replacing the medium especially if it's like a jump drive or an external hard drive, the recommendation in the field is to replace them or migrate them every 5 to 7 years. So keep that in mind for your budget and also your time as well. And here's another handy way to think about it. In the digital preservation realm, we like to say, try to follow the 3-2-1 rule. And that's 3 complete copies in 2 different media locations, whether it's a mix of a hard drive, a computer, cloud storage, and 1 ideally stored offsite, like cloud storage. This is to help with any sort of equipment failures, but also in case the file format just becomes corrupt. You never know. It won't tell you like, I don't work anymore. So if you have 3 copies somewhere, that's going to help. And it will also help you. It's also going to help you plan better for storage. So again, what storage you decide on will depend on the scope and size of the material you scan and your budget. There's lots of free introductory offers for cloud storage space. I think Google right now offers the most for free at 15 gigabytes. But if you're creating large files, they're going to quickly eat up a lot of space. So again, you want a mix of storage, and think about transferring and migrating those materials every 5 to 7 years. All right. Wow, that's a lot of information before we hit scan, right? So now that we've made some decisions, let's get into some of the specifics when it comes to scanning. And this is probably what you've all been waiting for. Now, remember when I said that digitizing is not the same as preservation? It's because you are creating a digital object that needs to be stored, managed, and accessible in order to make it useful. So what is it we're actually creating when we digitize our family material? And I really like this quote and pretty much everything that Paul Conway does. He's an archivist and professor at the University of Michigan. And he's done extensive research on digitization and digital preservation. And I think this quote really kind of sums it up. So digitization is the process of transforming an object into a numerical code. The baseline of digital technology is a coding system with only 2 numbers, 1 and 0, hence the term binary. Each numerical place in the system is a bit. In the digital world, bits are things. They take up space. They take up time to move from one place to another. A collection of bits can be described and counted much like anything. So again, you're not just creating a file format and sending it on its way and it's suddenly accessible. You're actually creating a thing that does take up space. Even cloud storage isn't just in the cloud. It's actually a physical server just somewhere else. So it's all physical and material. All right. So once we get into the actual, you're ready to get your digitization project started. You've got your equipment set up. You've got your material set up. Let's talk about preparing the space. So one thing you want to consider when you're actually ready to scan, when you have all the right equipment in place, is to think about your equipment space. You want to have a good place to actually store your photographs or material in one place where they won't accidentally be knocked off. Make sure coffee and drinks are not nearby. You don't want to accidentally spill coffee on your family letters as you're digitizing them. So that's something to consider. And then keeping this safe place for once they are done as well. So thinking about your space. For the equipment itself, making sure that it's clean from dirt, smudges, or even dust particles. They're very, very sensitive. So if you get a little bit of dust on them or some lint or even a hair that will fall off, that will show up. And especially for like film-based material, it can really affect the quality of the material. So just wipe it off with like a microfiber sponge or cloth, basically, that's not going to have more lint on it. You want to remove any staples or paper clips if those happen to be on them. And again, organize them into manageable piles and make a safe space that's free of food and coffee and stuff like that, so that they don't get damaged in the process or accidentally fall on the floor. All right, so I'm going to get into a little bit more of the technical settings and information, because this stuff will come up, especially when you're dealing with the equipment. I have just took this screenshot from the Library of Congress. Has this wonderful webpage called Personal Archiving, and they have a number of really amazing tutorials and guides that you can print out. And I have a screenshot of it at the end. The URL for this particular one is right on the end there, but it goes through some of the common terms that you will come across when you're selecting scanner settings. And that is across the board, whether you have, an auto feed scanner, doing slides, using a flatbed scanner. These are going to come up as options for you, and they might seem overwhelming. Like, I thought I could just hit, why do I have to make all these different decisions? So you'll come across some of them, like bitonal for black and white images, grayscale, color, resolution. This is the big one because it'll depend on your it'll ultimately help you create this file size that you're going to create, and how much space that's going to take. One other thing you'll notice a lot that comes up with the equipment is you'll see you get to choose what DPI or PPI you get to pick. And this just means dots per inch or pixels per inch. Try not to make it too technical, but like when you print out an item and you tell the printer to print it like reads the DPI or dots per inch of how many color or grayscale items are per inch, basically. Again, it's a very technical, we're creating ones and zeros and there's different spaces and how much it's kept up. You don't need to know a lot about that. Just know that I'll give you the standards that we use that will keep a good file format, but don't let this intimidate you. But just know these all kind of play into like what ultimately your file is going to look like in the end and how much space and what size file format it's going to ultimately create. So I'm going to show example about one of the biggest settings that you get to choose, and that's resolution. Because when you pick out the equipment, you'll come across these terms. Like some flatbed scanners say they can go up to 3600 DPI, but you may not necessarily need that because that's going to create a huge file format. So I've chosen, there's this really wonderful source called from the American Library Association. They have, I have 2 screen grabs of what an image looks like at different resolutions or DPI, dots per inch. So on the far left, they have blown up this image that they've scanned at 200 PPI or pixels per inch. And then on the far right, we have it all the way up to 700 PPI. You can see when you blow it up, the one on the left is very pixelated. When you blow it up, it's a little bit pixelated and blurry. Whereas the one on the far right has a little bit more finer detail. Now, again, if you're just going to be sharing these photographs on Facebook or on a website, having a lower file format is fine. Having it at a lower resolution, 200 PPI is totally fine. But if you maybe want to print something or blow it up, if you have a 4x6 photograph that you maybe want to enhance or frame in a larger photo, that level of detail, if you scan it at too low of a resolution, is going to come up. So you may want to consider a larger one. Here's another example with text-based formats, and I think this one's a little bit easier to see. If you really look at the letters, especially like the TH, again, that's a 200 level DPI that they scanned it at. Again, that's fine if you're just going to share it on the web, not big deal. But if you want to create a print of it, that level of blurriness is going to come out unless you scan it at a higher resolution. So that's basically what those mean and what those scanner settings are trying to tell you. All right, so let's go over now that I've kind of like gotten a little bit in technical detail and I don't want to overwhelm you, I'm just going to give you some like real baseline things for resolution. So for documents and photographs, anything under 8x10, the recommended setting is 300 DPI or PPI. For photographs that are a little bit larger, you may want to go a little bit higher at 400 to 600 DPI. Again, that will just create different size file formats. Now for negatives and film-based material, because they are smaller and you can't really see it in a usable way, it is recommended to go a slightly higher resolution. So anywhere between 800 and 1200 DPI is the recommended setting. Again, this is just all on personal preference and what your storage options are, and which is why I really harped on thinking about storage, because at 1200 DPI, that's going to create a very large file. And if you don't have a lot of like internal memory on your computer, it's going to crash it, or it's going to crash a website if you try and put it up there. So here's an example of what you might come across if you're using like a flatbed scanner or any sort of software equipment or software settings. It'll give you a bunch of different options. You can pick the document type, reflective versus negative. Reflective just means it's like a piece of paper. You know, the document type, the equipment type, image type. Usually anything, I would recommend using color, the 24-bit color versus the 8-bit grayscale. That just gives you, even if something isn't black and white, most people just choose to put it in color because you get more of the definition and tone versus just doing it in grayscale. And it gives you the option. Now, if you're really adventurous and want to like play around with the adjustments for color, see if a color photograph has been damaged over time, you do have those options in the adjustment setting, but really you can just kind of stick to what you want. So don't feel intimidated when you see all these options. Hopefully walking through these, you can see that it's pretty simple and straightforward of like, there's not that many settings, even though there's lots of different options there. And then of course you can pick, you know, you can crop the photograph, you can see the preview area before you actually even press scan. All right, so once we've scanned our materials, we want to be able to access them. So having good file names, writing them down, and using a good folder structure will go a long way to help you actually find and use what you scanned. So I get asked all the time, even by our staff, of like, what is a good file name? And I came across this really amazing resource from this outside consultant called the Family Curator. She has her own website, and she has a great recommendation for when you're coming up with file names, because that's kind of an entry point of how people find and use and describe their materials. She recommends the easy format. So I'll walk through what that means. Eliminate special characters, avoid spaces and periods. Shorter is better. And when using dates, use the year first and then the month and date afterwards. And I'll go over why each of these, of why that is in just a moment here. So no special characters. This is what I mean. All these weird, fun, special characters. This is because if you were to transfer between one system and another, the computer cannot read these special characters. They're great if you're like, is this someone's wedding ? You can put that in this descriptive note, but not the file format, because if you were to transfer it from system to system, it's not going to be able to read it, and it's going to give you an error, and it's at a risk of just being corrupted. Keeping them short, less than 25 characters, is really ideal for the same reason. When you're moving it from system to system, if it's a really long file format, it's not going to be able to read it because it's a lot of characters that it needs to remember, and there's more risk of being corrupted over time. So don't put in the entire paragraph description in your file name, please. Just keep it brief. For dates, again, a lot of this is just because computers read that code in a very specific way. So keeping it in the uniform, like universal coding system of year, month, and date first is great. So those are some of the recommended things. What I always like to tell people is just pick something that makes sense to you and then just write it down. I keep track of all of our file formats and file names in a spreadsheet. So we pick a small conventional format, and then anything else we need to know about that file, we put it in the spreadsheet and it gives it more description. So just pick something that makes sense to you. Don't feel overwhelmed by it, and then just write it down and stick to it. Now for file formats, it's really important to think about standardized formats. There are a lot of different formats out there, but sticking to ones that are standardized and can talk to different systems without being system specific is really helpful. For photographs and negatives, either a TIFF file, which will create a large photograph. It's an uncompressed file. This is great if you want to like print something, but a JPEG is also fine. It can be read anywhere. For documents, PDF is really great. That's the standard format. For audio or film, you can save it as a .wav or a .mp3 or .mov file, but that's only if you choose to do that digitization in-house. So again, this is from the Library of Congress Personal Digital Archiving website. I think they have this really wonderful way of thinking about file formats. They recommend, and I also agree, of picking a like folder within a folder structure. So instead of giving your file name the whole title and description, a paragraph of what's going on in that photograph, you just come up with the folder naming system. So here's an example of, you know, some family photographs and a wedding. So that's why you're thinking about grouping things and digitizing them by events, by people, by dates. So you can say, you know, family vacation 2016 in the folder name, but not in the file name. And then just coming up with the date and then like a very brief description. So that can help you keep it organized. And if you need to migrate it to different systems, in that it keeps that folder structure. All right. Ooh, so once we've organized and decided on organizational structure with your folders and we've decided on a file naming schema, we want to actually save our work. So start saving with it locally on your device, and then you can easily move your folder and file structure, whether it's a hard drive or a cloud-based system. And again, remember how we talked about resolution? When you're saving, you want to think about its intended use. So are these files just for sharing online, on social media? If so, you can make a copy from your high quality scan and compress it down into a smaller format. Because sharing a large file on social media, they'll say this is too large, or it'll crash the website, or you won't be able to send it via email. So thinking about your storage devices, which is why we've already planned for that, and then who you actually intend to share it with. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our session, and hopefully you all have questions, but just want to wrap it up with considerations for getting started. So again, you don't have to digitize everything. Don't feel like you need to preserve it all by digitizing it. That's going to be a huge step in the right direction. Really take the time to select and organize by event, especially if you have, you know, on the back of a photograph, if it's labeled with a date or names of people, you want to be able to transfer that into your folder naming system and sharing that online. So taking the time to group things by events or people and format is going to go a long way in a successful project. And then start small. It can be really overwhelming when you look at how many boxes of materials you may want to consider, but just pick something small. Pick up one event, one family vacation, and start from there and see how much time it actually takes. See how much time the equipment takes, how much time you take as like a pilot project. And that will go a long way to seeing how much further you want to go along in it. I've mentioned this resource a number of times, and I just want to plug it one more time and give you the URL again for digitalpreservation.gov/personal archiving. They have really amazing resources. Some of them seem a little dated, but it's like not dated at all. The information is still good, and they have it for photographs, for audio, all sorts of formats. It's really wonderful. All right, with that, perfect timing. I will hand it over so we can take some questions.
Joining us virtually can participate as well.
I've done a lot of scanning, but I'm a neophyte. When you're scanning a picture and the pixels are bad, the scanner adjust that, or are you just scanning and getting the same thing that is in the picture?
Right. So when you're scanning it, you're getting the same thing as you do in a
Yeah.
picture. It's just creating some
Okay,
pixels.
that's
But
been my
how-
experience, but yeah.
And so that DPI means how many pixels per inch. So
Yeah.
if you set it at a really low resolution of like 12, I don't know, it's going to be really dotty and kind of blocky looking.
Right.
But if you add more pixels in there, it's just gathering more information basically to look at and mirror the original object as much as possible.
Okay. The other thing, I do have a large scanner, and what has been handy, if you're taking like a lot of little small pictures and you, instead of scanning each one every time, you can lay them out on the big scanner and have 5 things in there. And if you put a little space between them, they'll scan all of them individually most of the time. Nothing is perfect. But it sure is a lot easier to press the button once, or if you do put them close, you can just go to your adjustments, to save them 3 times and then work with each one individually. Like, anyway.
Good. Thank you. That's a great tip to know. Yes.
So I have a specific technical, practical question, and that's about very old photographs scanning in a frame. And can it be done? Is there a technique to it? There are ones I don't want to take out of frames because they're old. The frames may have some value. There's writing on the back of the paper. Can you do that?
That's a great question, actually. I didn't include frame photographs. Those are trickier, especially on a flatbed scanner, because basically a flatbed scanner, the way it works is that there's a light bar that goes and scans it, and what resolution and how fast it does is going to depend on that. When you put a framed object on there, the reflection will come off. You'll get some glare, you'll get some lighting issues. When we scan framed materials, we tend to stay away from it. We try to deframe it. We have had success, but with overhead cameras. So that might be something, if it's really important to digitize to you, to seek out a vendor to do that because they have the right equipment. I have also had people tell me that they use this with like a right light settings to get, the overhead lighting glare out of it, and it's fine. Like if you just want a copy to share with people, that's totally fine. Or if you have a professional, not this, a camera that's a little bit more professional grade, just making sure there's no overhead lighting. So like getting it in maybe daylight outside and kind of playing with some of the shading is totally fine too.
That sort of relates to my question. You talk for scanning about some of the different hardware devices, but there are also apps on the phone as well as using the camera.
Yes.
How do you compare what you can do with this versus what you have to do with the hardware?
Sure. That's a really great question. The phones and the apps are getting better and better each time. And that's why I showed that scanning equipment from the negatives goes straight to your phone and then to an app. So I'm not as familiar because we tend to stay away from that for our purposes. But if you're just wanting to get it quickly and sharing it with people, that's a great option. I actually have an app on my phone called Tiny Scanner when I need to scan some documents for signing purposes, and they're getting better and better all the time. I mean, they save it as a PDF and kind of like low grade, grayscale quality, but there are some ones that are becoming much, much better. So again, if your purpose of it is to just create an access point for it, that's totally great and wonderful too. If you want to like do more things and have a high quality resolution so you can print them, or just have them at a higher resolution just because maybe this isn't fine, but if you're just trying to share them and do it quickly, and you have the right light settings so you don't get an accidental glare from it, those are great too.
So from our online folks, a couple times the term ancestry.com has come up. Could you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using ancestry.com for your storage, and any other considerations that might be with that particular big player in this sort of arena?
Yes. So Ancestry has become a really great resource. They have gone to libraries across the country over the past 20 years and have digitized their microfilm, all those city directories, all the census records, and they're available, not always keyword searchable. And now you can create your own profiles and share things. My sister was just looking at my mother's side on Family Tree and found a photograph of our great uncle when he was in the Canadian military in World War I. I'm like, that's really cool. And it blew my mom away. My caveat is that it's a paid vendor, private company. And so you don't know how long they will be around. They are a big player now, but who knows when they might change their terms of service. They might up their individual accounts to make it not affordable for you anymore. And then what happens if what if they lose their stuff? So that's always considered. I would keep it as one place you can store your materials, especially if you want to share it, but please don't make it your only storage.
I have a photograph of like, I don't know, 5 or 6 people in it, and I want to identify it. And what I've done is like included, like when I say this is Mary's wedding with, whoever's in the picture. But I was wondering if I just can, is there a way I could just write on the picture, like on the bottom of it, like maybe get a text box or something like I do in Word, you can put a text box in it. But with my photos, what do you do?
Oh, sure. So how do you keep that identifying information with the photograph? You can either put like a card on the bottom of the photograph when you're scanning it to say this is who it's in. Sometimes, especially at the archives here, we'll also scan the back of the photograph if it's on the back. And then there's also, software now that can put that in. So a lot of photo sharing sites like Flickr or even Shutterfly now, I think you can add in some of that information of this is who is in this photograph, and it keeps it with the file. So, and like Google Photographs is pretty powerful and also a little creepy with like seeing the faces. So keep all the faces together. So there's a lot of different software sharing abilities where you can add in that information later too. So that's totally fine.
If I've already scanned it
Mhm.
and it's in my computer,
Oh, sure.
so I want to bring it back up, then what software, is there software you recommend that's fairly easy to use? I've tried that Adobe Photoshop.
Mhm.
I think that's bigger than what I really need.
Yes. I would try like a photo sharing site like Flickr, where you can add in that. You can just put in the files and transfer it there. And then you can add in that descriptive information later and it keeps it all together. So it's like the digital equivalent of, writing on the back of the photograph.
And so when I do that, then I can save it back to where I don't want to keep it on Flickr.
You would probably have to keep it on Flickr for the descriptive information. That's a little bit more technical if you wanted to then you're getting into embedding it in the metadata and the code.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit technical. You could always, work around is put it in a Word document and type underneath it too. You can add it as a text box in, I think even in Microsoft Photos now, you don't even need Adobe Photoshop. I think you can even just add in a text. So even some of the apps and stuff can let you put some labeling information now. So let me think about that and you
Okay.
can email me. So
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have our photograph, we go through the whole scanning process, and then you have the anxiety of what to do with the photograph after you're totally done. What do you do? Do you, okay, I got my 5 ways to store it. Do I throw it away? Or do I keep it in the same box up in the attic, and just put a piece of paper in there? It's stored here, 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 and here. So for the future generations, when they, I'm gone, they'll see it and say, oh, it's stored here. But I still have that old 120-year-old photograph of my great grandmother.
So that is a personal decision.
Yeah.
I personally say keep it. Because even though you have it in 5 different digital formats, the physical format is still more fragile and known to be stable over time. However, don't keep it in your attic, please, because that will degrade it over time. Keeping it in a closet where the temperature is much more stable, and you don't have like a leaky roof situation that might happen someday. So keeping it out of risk, because some people do digitize to save it for, you know, in case of a flood or a fire or something like that. And that's totally acceptable. Those are at risk for that. But in the preservation field, the original format is the standard. If it's taking up a lot of space and you're really worried about space issues, that's a personal decision that if you're okay with it. Like the KonMari method of like thinking it and then just getting rid of it. So that's just something up for you. If you don't want to store it anymore, if it's just taking up too much space and you're pretty comfortable, if something were to happen with one of your 10 files somewhere, then you can do that.
I just think of my 2 sons that would eventually get all of my stuff. They
Yeah.
said, well, and they're, 25 and 30. They're not going to want to keep the original. They said, they're the digital world. That's what they live in.
Yeah.
So they're going to keep the digital and throw it away after I'm gone.
So
So,
that's something-
do I do it?
So that's something you can ask them, is
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
would be the ones who would get it.
Right.
I personally, all my photos are on here, but I print them out.
Oh.
I do.
Yeah.
Because my kids like to look through them, but if they decide that they don't want to keep all of them, that's their decision. So.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My question's on the cleaning up smudges and things of that sort. My family photos from the old days have the little black corners, and that adhesive has gotten on those photographs. And then in the 70s, some evil genius came up with this format. You put the photo down and you can move it around allegedly. After 50 years, the stuff turns into epoxy. Can you get photos out of those albums that have the little line adhesive with the, is there a hair dryer or what can you use?
It really depends. If you're really worried about it, you can ask some friendly archivists to take a look. If it can come out sort of easily, and especially if the adhesive has dried up enough where you can easily get it out, then yes, you can get it out. But if it's really stuck in there, then you're really going to risk the damage of that. And it's either stuck there or you can get a professional conservator to take care of that. So the answer is yes, but if you're a trained conservator. But if it's just in there and it's stable, yeah.
So-
Don't try to cut it out or anything. Try to,
With
it
the black
happens.
smudges, Q-tip and water, or is there anything that?
not water.
No.
It depends on the format. So like with photographs, that's a great point. If you're dealing with photographs and don't want smudges, wear gloves, please. Or just clean, dry hands, because you don't want food smudges on there. If there's a smudge on there already, you can test a small area of the photograph with like a microfiber cloth that won't add any more lint, and see if any of the emulsion comes off. But if it's starting to damage it, just stop. It's better to stop. So, yeah. Yes.
I've got about 40 years worth of slides before I got digital camera. Are any of those commercial slide conversion services reasonable, and are they any good? And
Yeah.
recommendations?
So there are some commercial options available both locally and nationally that'll do it. And it just kind of depends on your price point and what you want available. So locally, there's a place that even we have taken stuff here at the Filson called Video Kitchen. They do a number of different variety of formats, and it's pretty reasonably priced. I see a lot of vendors now, like there's a place called Legacy Box where you just pick a bunch of stuff, put it in their box, ship it to them, and they give it to you. So that is an option too. If you're after this, you're like, I don't want to do it. I want to have someone else do it. There's a lot of options out there. But talking to them about the equipment that they use, the formats that are given back to you, and the pricing is really important to consider.
So I think we have maybe time for one quick one, and then go ahead and wrap up.
My cousin has done a PowerPoint of the really old photos, and that provided a way to name everybody down in the PowerPoint. But now I'm becoming worried that PowerPoint won't, that it'll go out because Keynote's already gone away.
Right.
So is there a way do you recommend using it? And is there a way to transfer it to something else easily?
Yes, there is. And actually PowerPoint is a great idea and option for putting a label on the photograph and saving it. You can save it as a PowerPoint.ppt file, but the better way is to save it when you go to the print settings. You can save as a PDF and save it as a PDF. That is a preservation format that is considered a long-term stable preservation friendly format. So save it as a PDF.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great practical advice to end on. So
Great.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.